And we're live. And it came to pass that the Greek chorus grew restive because the little imp known as Cleo was not making enough of an appearance on the show. And it came to pass that the long-suffering Ben agreed that she would make an appearance this morning, whereupon she immediately ran out of the room. So we're live. It is Tuesday, April 15th, the year of our Lord 2025. It is 8 o'clock a.m. Nastia is going to join us later in the show. It is a Vishivanka day as a result. Yes, the puppy known as Cleo will be making an appearance. But for now, I am here by myself. Holly being on vacation, Alicia being overseas, Ev being consumed in the joys of owning a house, and Kate being, doing all the things like morning teaching that Kate does, and Scott Shapiro being, just AWOL. And so, I'm here by myself. Eventually, Nastia is going to show up, maybe with Ava, maybe without. And until then, I want to talk about the dumbest headline I have seen in a long time. Headline question. And, this one was actually sent to me by an alert reader, and you all should, when you see particularly dumb headline questions, send them my way. And I'm actually going to text the alert reader here in question that she should log in, because talking about this now on the show, you should listen. This reader is, whoops, I just sent that to the wrong person. That was dumb. I sent it to Mike Pesca. Talking about this now on the show, you should tune in. And now I have to unsend it to Mike Pesca because that would be very confusing to him. All right, so the headline in question from the Washington Post is "Why Not Attend Your Own Funeral?" And there are a few reasons why you might not attend your own funeral. One of them is that you've been incinerated in a plane crash and there's really no you left to attend. Another one is that, you've been quietly disposed of by your family in, scattered, your ashes have been scattered, and then you are, they have a memorial service for you or something. But most of you, my friends, are going to attend your own funeral. And so this is one of those few headlines questions where the actual premise is wrong, because one of the defining features of John Hawkinson's funeral is that John Hawkinson will actually be there, whether he wants to or not. One of the defining features of my funeral, because if I'm not there, if, say, John Hawkinson's is there instead of me, then it's going to be John Hawkinson's funeral, not mine. And if Laura Donna is there instead of John, it's going to be Laura Donna's funeral. And so, really, one of the defining features of the, it being your funeral is that you're there in a box. Okay? So, the premise of the question is wrong. Now, second point, let us interpret the question as I think the author of the headline probably intended it, which is, why don't we have your funeral while you're alive and, able to enjoy it instead of waiting until you're in a box? In other words, why don't we have your funeral while you're conscious? And this gets to the other defining feature of a funeral, which is that you're dead. And so if you were to attend it alive, again, it would just not be a funeral. It might be yours, but it wouldn't be a funeral. And so I really think the Washington Post needs to rethink this headline. We are not allowed to have fun anymore. You are watching Dog Shirt TV. It is a revolution in morning television. And one of the revolutionary features is that, I sit here and vamp until somebody shows up, whether it's Nastia, who will be here in, 15 or 20 minutes, or whether it's, John, who wants to give an update on what happened at the hearing in Vermont yesterday, or whether it's Mike Pesca, who shows up because I accidentally texted him a link to the show instead of sending it to the alert reader who sent in that headline. We are here. And I think I've exhausted the idiocy of that hearing. Of that hearing. No, the idiocy of hearings is a thing that has not been exhausted. The idiocy of that headline. All right. So we have a little bit of time before Nastia shows up. So the phones are open. Or as they say, the join the screens are open. This is a great time for people to pop in and say hello. And in the meantime, oh, the puppy is biting people, as you can hear. What's going on? Oh, okay. Oh, the puppy escaped. But now, okay, here we go. Here's the opportunity for a Cleo sighting. There she is. And now she is very upset because she is boxed in and stuck behind the closed door. There you go. She is going to be with us today in the room. I am going to try to catch her, which is tough, and put her on the lap. But she's quite upset with me. Cleo, come over here. Now she's back in the wires again, which is not a good place for her to be. All right. So, who has something to talk about? This is very hard, by the way, to talk by myself with an upset puppy zooming around the room, and to keep a flow of verbiage worthy of Dog Shirt TV that would be getting a high rating from Holly while also keeping this going, um, and not being too distracted by the puppy. Um, Hello, Joel.
Mr. Benjamin, how are you?
I'm all right. I'm trying to calm down the puppy here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got her now.
There you go. Let's see. Let's see if I can find Thor. Thor. Let's see if he'll come over here and make an appearance. Well, what's been happening with you lately?
Well, I've been talking for 10 minutes about what's been happening with me. What's been happening with you?
Uh, it's been pretty mild around here, so I've had a couple of days where it's been Vespa weather, which is nice. So I've been out on the Vespa a couple of times. That's kind of nice to do. Um, Spending a lot of time at the shop, 3D printing stuff.
What are you 3D printing?
3D printing prototypes of, well, what I make is stuff that is teaching aids for mountain bike coaches to teach skills to people. And so I make a series of products that you can use. And right now I'm making sort of a ubiquitous Lego that you can make log piles out of for training people to get over log piles. And we developed a one-sided Velcro.
Hmm.
So it's only one single surface. They're identical, but they act like Velcro. So
And
these
what?
logs have this Velcro, the single-sided Velcro, all the way around them. So they're these cylinders, and then they all stick together and make log piles. So that's what I've been working on at the shop.
Gotcha. Very cool.
Yeah,
Um, and what, so you're, for those who don't know Joel is a kind of multiple sport guy. He's got
yeah,
cross country skiing in the winter
yeah,
and mountain biking in the summer or
yeah.
in the spring and summer. Is that fair?
That's correct.
And is ski season completely done now?
Yep, yep. We finished up in February. So my team went to the state meet, and I am not kidding. Our girls' team is state champions.
Very cool.
Yep, yep. They did a heck of a job up there,
And
and
and how many men are on your girls' team?
so the boys' team got fourth.
No, no, that's not what I asked.
Uh,
I'm doing an
uh,
anti-DEI thing. How many males do you have on your girls' team? Don't
Zero
answer that
currently.
question. I'm being a pretend asshole.
I in my coaching over the years have had a couple of athletes
And
that were trans athletes.
in your experience, did trans athletes pose any kind of a problem in competition?
Absolutely zero.
All right, that was a quick conversation, though.
And the whole team was like, yeah, all right. It was such a nothing burger. Okay, zero big deal. Now I can't speak to other people's experience, but that's been mine.
And was that a mountain biking experience or a skiing experience or both?
It's come up in both environments. Yep.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Um, so
Nice kids.
is your instinct that the whole subject of trans athletes is a manufactured bit of nonsense, or that there are some real issues in certain sports in certain places, but they haven't arisen in your experience?
I think it is 99% political nonsense. There are a couple amongst exercise physiologists. There are some discussions about development stuff that have some validity to them, but in reality and in practice, so far, Zippo, not a big
Hmm.
deal. So I think there's a discussion that goes on in exercise physiology and athletics that people who get caught doping, and it's tangential, but we'll get there, um, should suffer a lifetime ban because lots of professional athletes that get caught like that, they dope for a while, they reap the gains from it, they get caught, they do a little suspension, and then when they come back, they retain much of the gains from the doping time period. You put on piles of muscle and bone density and a whole bunch of stuff. And so some people argue that those kinds of developmental advantages may exist in these cases too. However, it's much more individualized and much harder to make a quantitative assessment. That is the one piece of this that seems to be grounded in some kind of a discussion, and I don't know it, and I'm not going to say that it applies directly in this case or anything like that. But that's the one area of discussion that I have heard. But then again, in practice, and it's just been nothing. No big deal.
Yeah.
So far.
As you know, I have never delved deep in the trans athletes conversation, and my own opinion of the subject is highly conditioned by the fact that, number one, I am the parent of a trans child, and number two, I have a presumption that a lot of the issues around this subject are garbage.
I agree.
And I just start with that as this is one that I never had to deal with, but I had to deal with school bathrooms issues a lot.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm constantly amazed at how illiterate the conversation is. And so I start with the assumption that the conversation is presumptively bullshit until proven otherwise. But,
Yeah.
it's not one I've spent a lot of time with. So what else is on your mind this morning, Mr. Joel?
Oh, just the usual stuff. Concerns about what we're seeing kind of in your area of the country, and the folks that are running things, and concerns about their abilities to do so.
So here's a question for you. You're out there in real America.
The Great Cornfield Desert, as I call it.
Yeah. And so what have you seen in your real American existence that is a reflection of what I call the situation, other than like reading the news and reading about what's going on in Washington? Have you actually seen downstream effects of all the bullshit, or is it just a news item to you?
The stuff that's on the news and TV is so detached from what I actually see that rarely do the two things overlap in a meaningful way. I think the narrative nationally is so much more political theater than reality that it just doesn't apply very often. However, I will say it's been interesting because, as you know, I live here in Minneapolis, and we have a cabin in rural Wisconsin. And I do have an opportunity regularly to see and talk with people both in a urbanish, I mean, we live in the city, so urban sort of, and in a rural set of circumstances. And what I see is a real difference between those two populations and their belief in the validity of their futures. Rural people are struggling harder than we think they are in many ways. And there is a greater sense of desperation in rural areas. And there's a whole bunch of things that come with it. Rural healthcare seems to be in a real mess. And collapsing economies so on and so forth. It's been interesting though, because the rural areas of Wisconsin that we tend to hang out in tend to be quite conservative. And for the last while, since 2016, heavily Trumpian, lots of signs and stuff. But one of the things that led me to have some optimism about the Harris campaign was we were seeing a bizarrely high number of Harris signs in these areas. And now what we're seeing is anti-Musk demonstrations in little teeny towns. That's different.
That's interesting.
It's really different. So
and that's in Wisconsin or
in Wisconsin. Yeah, so little teeny towns. Maybe 1,000 people, maybe 2,000. And there they are on the main intersection with the highways, signs.
And do you attribute that to the fact that there was just an election, the Supreme Court election in Wisconsin, that was kind of turned on Musk stuff?
I don't know for sure. I think it probably was more related to cuts in federal programs that have heavy impact, or discussions of cuts on federal impact that have heavy impact for rural people. Those programs, like for instance, the cut in the program that local farmers would provide produce to school districts. Well, that lands hard on some folks.
Right.
And that's not far away, and in theory, that's this spring, this summer, and how much I'm going to make this fall. That matters. That's going to land on you.
Yeah, I mean, Musk is an interesting choice for Trump, because Trump is Jeff says in the chat that Musk is eminently hateable. Trump is eminently hateable too, but he has this charisma that has developed a real following among the people who admire him.
Right.
Musk does not. I mean, he was not, he's just, he's not particularly charismatic. He hasn't spent time the way Trump has developing a following in the same way, right?
Right.
There was no reality show there. He's just a plutocrat with some very unusual views that are repellent to a lot of people, and a assumption of entitlement to wreck other people's lives, and I wonder how long Trump can realistically get away with. I don't purport to have any sense of what the answer to this, but to subcontract some portion of his reputation. And so the Wisconsin Supreme Court race was interesting. Trump was, or the conservative candidate was getting a lot of money from Musk.
Right.
But Musk also became the entire focus of the campaign for the ultimately winning candidate. And he was there in that role as a kind of surrogate for Trump. And I wonder how long you can do this this dance of benefiting from Musk without sort of using Musk as your money bank and your hatchet man, and he's playing a lot of roles for Trump. But, when you let him play those roles, eventually he becomes a part of your persona. And, there's no evidence to my mind that he is a useful part of Trump's persona. He's
I agree.
He's a part that negatively impacts Trump for whatever positive benefits he might also have, which are real, bottomless pockets and a kind of Rasputin-like hatchet man who
Hmm.
can, do a lot of things that apparently Trump wants done, but doesn't want to be the bad guy and do himself.
Yeah, I think an example of this might be the Wisconsin situation and the bribery scheme to buy votes. Honorable, decent people might look upon that effort as deeply insulting. The
Right.
belief that their votes are for sale, you could be offended by that. And so he may have sown some unnecessary negativity in what they're doing in the executive in general, which will rub off on Trump. And eventually he's not going to like it
Right.
because that seems really insulting.
No, I think that's right. I think he's there is this assumption that everybody is as corrupt as they are.
Right.
And and I don't know why that assumption has not offended more people already.
Right.
But it does seem to have pissed some people off in Wisconsin,
Yeah,
and
it does.
it may be the reason for that is that it was done by somebody other than Trump.
Yeah.
That when Trump comes in and says it, it gets enveloped in his persona in a fashion that is, as the he tells it like it is, right? Um, but when Musk comes in and does it for him, it
Hmm.
becomes people see it less as a performance and more as a sort of genuine challenge to their autonomy.
He doesn't seem to be capable of pairing creating a sense of authenticity with these people in addition to this sort of powerful figure. Trump, for some reason, seems to be able to connect authenticity to it for these folks. And Musk doesn't seem to have that capability. And that's maybe going to be a problem for him, which is good because it should be a problem. One
Right.
of the things I've been thinking about is if we think about sort of earliest 20th century robber barons and how that played out, I kind of wonder, you have US Steel and Standard Oil and railroads. They were as they had as big an impact on the daily lives of Americans as our media environment does now.
Yes.
Because of and so they were as critical to the stability of this nation as the media environment is now. And I kind of wonder if the two things will play out similarly. And this is not an area of expertise for me whatsoever, but it does seem to have an interesting mirror effect. And I kind of wonder if there are lessons in that process to consider.
It's the analogy that's always drawn, the new Gilded Age,
Right.
the effects of some of those technologies were greater connectivity, right? Railroads bringing communities together, creating mobility, but there were differences too. And um, so one of the differences is that there was um, the degree of capital investment that these companies had to make was so extraordinary. Building railroads was not like building data centers, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, totally.
Um, the the other the other thing was that the replicability of the investments was, when you um, when you owned a railroad, you owned the only way to transport people and goods between X and Y that
Right.
wasn't um and so the quality of, we debate whether certain technologies, Facebook is going into um uh a long trial with the FTC right now over um you know its supposed monopoly position in certain social media. And one of the questions is this really a monopoly, right? Given
Hmm.
all the other ways there are to communicate, all the other messaging apps, all the other ways to share pictures and, videos and whatnot. When you are um, Standard Oil, uh, there is the degree of monopolization is just much greater, and the sunk costs in developing, or it's not sunk costs, but the capital it would take to set up a competing operation is really extreme, and the agility of companies in order to do those things are much more limited. And so, I do think one advantage that we have right now, Starlink seems very entrenched, but if
Hmm.
you wanted to replicate Starlink's capacity, it is much more doable than replicating Standard Oil,
Hmm.
and the Canadians are actually talking about doing it.
Right.
It's really a question of will and investment rather than capacity. And that's true, by the way, of a lot of these entities. Some of them less clear, like Amazon. But particularly the ones that exist virtually. You know, could you replicate some of these entities? Yeah, if you had enough um, will, enough money. John Hawkinson points out enough time.
Hmm.
Um, they are doable, and one example of that is Microsoft, which back when I was a young editorial writer seemed like the most entrenched monopoly in the space and doesn't seem very threatening today, and actually the government won a major antitrust case against
Hmm.
Microsoft and then kind of let up on it and
Right.
didn't do any worthwhile remedies. But then this little company Google came around and kind of punked them,
Right.
and so I do think the one advantage that we have is that the situation is a little bit more dynamic than it was then, and naturally gives rise to competitions that we don't necessarily know how to anticipate. Um, and there are and I think that's good because it means that Elon Musk is much more replaceable than he sometimes looks to be.
Hmm.
And I am not a believer in administrations um, uh, retaliating against their political enemies, but I would hope that the next administration would not retaliate against Elon Musk, because I don't believe in that, but take strong steps to require separation between people who are, participating actively in the functioning of the executive branch and, assets that are uh, private and, need to be available on a non-discriminatory basis to consumers. And I would think that that would be something that any reasonable administration following this one would want to take a pretty hard look at in a fashion that would be uh, not good, let's say, for Elon Musk's business. And by the way, oh, the puppy is now chewing a wire. That is not good. Puppy, um, let's let go of the wire, okay? Yeah, that's fine. You can sit there, but no wires, okay?
So I have a follow-up question. Um, it seems that a big part of the equity here is the scale of captured audience and the data they produce and its equity. Is it getting to a point where it's not just the capabilities of the platform or what it offers, but a societal resistance to moving from one captured environment to another that is more similar to the kinds of infrastructure layouts that oil companies and railroads did, and that equity, rather than the platforms themselves, is kind of a new way of calculating equity in companies and value, and might be subject to some examination in a antitrust sort of way.
Well, I I am a little bit skeptical of the application of antitrust principles under current law to these companies. I don't I don't think it has been very effective, and I don't think it's likely to be very effective. Um, I do think you could write some new law that might be effective, but the question there becomes really, what are you trying to accomplish? And the European Union's gains in this area who have tried to do this have been pretty limited. Um, they've managed to get Apple to abandon the lightning switch, but
Yeah, right.
that's or the lightning plug, but that's kind of about it. I mean, they're not uh the companies look very much the same in Europe that they do here.
They do have a little bit of a different sort of privacy landscape, right?
They have a very different privacy
Okay, yeah.
landscape, but that doesn't sound in antitrust. That sounds in
Right, yeah.
privacy law. Um, so look, I think the honest answer is that the goal should be not to control the size of the companies, but to control the degree of walling of the gardens that you can do. So let me take an example from my real life. Um, when I saw that Twitter was beginning to come apart, and I had a heavy, heavy investment personally in Twitter, which I will never, ever do again.
Yeah.
Let my public voice become dependent on. This is going to sound like an ad for Substack, and maybe I mean it as one. But I decided, okay, I'm never doing that again. I can't take my Twitter following and port it somewhere because the people aren't there. Blue Sky didn't yet exist. There was no obvious alternative. So I started the Substack, Dog Shirt Daily, and I, for 6 months, used Twitter principally to route people toward the Substack. And then I blew up my Twitter account. Um, and So on Substack, on Twitter, I had 430,000 followers. On Substack, I have 15,000 subscribers. So, you know, less than 10%. But they're mine. And by what I mean by that is I can download the email list for my Substack anytime I want and move it to a different platform. You can't do that on Twitter.
Right.
You actually can do it on the federated um, uh, sites, like the Mastodon ecosystem. But the point is that, all right, I have many fewer followers, but I have control over the ecosystem that I'm working with. I'm not asking permission from uh, the heads of Substack for anything I do. Yeah, there are terms of service, um, but they're not difficult for, and if they ever displease me, I can walk away from the platform and use a different system for distributing to the same group of people. So I'm not chained to them by the nature of and I think that is a pretty good principle for, again, this is not about antitrust. It's about interoperability. Now, there's a relationship to antitrust because you create a monopoly and then you make it non-interactive with the rest of the world, non-interoperable with the rest of the world, and all of a sudden, um, you've bound people to the system. This is the old Microsoft case, right?
Mm.
Which is everybody needs Windows, and we can dominate the market for browsers as a result of that because they don't have a choice. Um, I think a general principle, and I don't know if you get to it by regulatory action or by standards competition or but we are moving through a combination of standards changes, some of them regulatory in nature, like USB-C, some of them consumer driven, like Mastodon, some of them, but you're moving toward a notion of greater interoperability between systems. And when Twitter violates that by destroying its API so that you can't embed stuff from other sites on Twitter, people leave. And so my view is I am willing to tolerate the curse of bigness with interoperability in a way that I am not willing to tolerate the curse of bigness without interoperability. And I think the fundamental problem with Google and Apple right now and with Microsoft is that they're not developing shared standards that are interoperable with each other. And where they are, which they do to some degree, right? Um, uh, I don't really have a problem with the fact that any of them is really big. Um, and so if I were in a regulatory capacity, I wouldn't say single-mindedly focused on interoperability, but I would be very interested in the creation of shared standards that allow people to move between systems easily. Think about how much easier it is if you're a Mac user to move all your stuff to the Windows ecosystem than it was 20 years ago when it was basically impossible.
Right.
Think about how we want to encourage that development, and it is getting better, and we want to discourage the ecosystems, um, like, for example, Facebook, that is entirely um, it just doesn't play with anything else except Instagram. And I, I do think if you have a world in which everything is interoperable um, with everything else, then you can achieve, even with very big companies, true consumer choice. Because a little guy can come along, make good stuff, and find niches among, the big boys. But if you,
Which kind of leads to your blue sky sort of example. And if I may, I'd like to. A while back on the show, you got into a discussion about one of the revolutionary features is that at
There
the
are
small,
many.
which are there are many, at this scale, very low asshole factor. The
It
the
is true.
the coefficient of assholes really low. But and I really was thinking about that, and I think there's something there that there is as things scale, ugliness comes with it. And I
Well,
have to say,
think about it this way. The vast majority of you is not your asshole,
right,
right? And so you need a certain amount of body before you're going to have a large component of asshole.
right. And so I was going to ask you if you thought, and I have my thoughts, if Blue Sky has started to show signs of the Whittisonian principle.
Oh yes.
That's what I thought. It's getting a little Whittisonian in there, man.
Yeah, I mean there's some like we are not free of assholes on Blue Sky. I don't actually spend a lot of time on Blue Sky.
Mm-hmm.
And my presence there is very much on send. I post
Right.
things. I mostly don't interact with people, and I don't use it for. So I have my own very specialized social media news service, which is Lawfare's Slack channels. And if I want to
Mm.
know what's going on in my space, I just open Slack and, you
Right.
know, Quinta and Anna and Roger Parloff and our other folks have already, they've done for me just by sharing stuff with each other and with the Lawfare group, you know, kind of what I need to know most of the time. And so I
Mm-hmm.
have this very bespoke, you know, service that is kind of my needs fed to me. And you know, if something happens in Ukraine, some Ukrainians are going to text me about it, or you know, share it in a location that I'm aware of, and so I don't actually need social media anymore for the news sharing
Right.
component of it because I've kind of recreated that in my own world. What I need social media for is transmission. You know, um, for me to blast out to large numbers of people, um, you know, what's in the column today, what is going on Lawfare. Um, and so I have become, I think I was a very typical user of Twitter in the sense that um I mean obviously my following was large and I used it for but in the sense of sort of sharing stuff that was going on in real time and
Right.
using it as a wire service
That was the
for
value for me too. That's
and
that's
I
what I
don't
used it
use
for.
and I don't use Blue Sky that way. I mean I do.
I currently am because there's kind of no other replacement. And the thing that I found was is that I ended up having to prune Twitter harder and harder and harder and harder, and the workload of having to prune out all the garbage to get to the pieces that I want just got so high. It's
Exactly.
almost all I did, and I'm
Right.
like, well, this is ridiculous.
Right. Um you know, if it weren't for Andrew says special military operations, I would be off Twitter. I
Right.
don't know that I would be on Blue Sky at all. I would
Mm-hmm.
simply have an account in my name that Lawfare posted stuff to. And I would set up a bot to automatically share Dogshirt Daily.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe I would keep it on my phone for like when I see a pretty flower or something, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not getting. very much value out of it as a social instrument. It's a loudspeaker for me. And I do, that's a very different mode of interaction than you have with, um, than I used to have with Twitter, or than if you think about like the proto social media site, um, uh, Facebook, where we identified our friends, by which we originally meant people that we actually knew. Nobody uses friend that way anymore on
Right.
Facebook, but it was like the people that you went to high school with, the people you went to college with, and people in your social world, and you connected with them and shared things with them. And I think relatively few people still use Facebook that way, although not none, because Facebook makes it extremely difficult to do that because it bombards you with um, extraneous stuff that is, you know, ad driven and algorithm driven and other things driven. It really, Facebook really wants me to pay somebody large amounts of money for an Eastern European wife right now. It doesn't seem to care that I'm married and
Right.
really have never done a search that remotely
Right.
suggests such a thing. But, boy, is it insistent about, and some of those ads are really like stuff like gets this close to human trafficking.
Right.
Um, but
So,
anyway, that's
real
neither here
quick.
nor there.
Speaking of Ukraine, I did want to plug a couple of YouTube people. There's a channel called Tasks and Purposes, and mostly it's military sort
It's
of
good.
entertainment, and it's quite good. And he did a ride along in Ukraine with soldiers that's maybe 45 minutes long, and it is really good.
I have not
Because
seen that and
he
will look it
talks to
up.
the people, he goes on a mission with them, he's riding in the thing with them, and they talk about how they do it. And here's the guy that's driving the drones, and it provides context that I found really helpful because it feels very far away and inhuman, and really did a nice job of letting you see it right up close and for real. And the other one is a guy that's a history person, and he, if you look up why the Russian Navy sucks, part 1 through 7, right? He also has one about the history of Ukraine, and I presume it's roughly right, but it was really good and extremely helpful because in 30 or 40 minutes, you're like, okay, at least I know what ballpark we're in here. And it was
So
really helpful.
interesting. So, for those who want a longer podcast series on the history of Ukraine, uh, back before a while back, Tim Snyder he made they recorded his Yale lectures in his History of Ukraine class and made a podcast out of it, and it's quite good. Uh, Carol says they are also on YouTube, but they're on some I don't know which podcast feed, but they're quite good. Snyder is eccentric in some ways, but it's very worth your time. Um, all right, we have 6 minutes. Joel, this has been a super pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for chatting. I really got a lot out of this. It was good to chat with you, and looks like you're feeling better. Last time I popped on, you were a little gray, not feeling too
Wow.
good. Well,
Wow.
you were
Well,
that episode where you were kind of sick and stuff. So I
yeah, that
thought,
was an
yeah,
unpleasant morning, but
y-
you should, if you've never done a show that you're not at least wondering if you're going to throw up on screen, like that is actually an interesting experience because
yeah,
you're
I
like,
bet.
okay, so like at what point in the nausea do I turn the camera off?
Mm-hmm.
Because, like turning your camera off in the middle of a show is not the best idea. But then how, like, do I want to stand up and run away from like,
Mm-hmm.
what's the protocol if you think there's an X% chance that you're going to vomit? Um,
Can I fake an internet outage?
yeah, exactly. Can you just, but also like, how much time do you need, right?
Right,
Because
right.
there's the
How much warning do
calculation
you
between,
need?
all right, the toilet is over there,
Right,
and it takes me 6 seconds to get to the toilet.
right.
And there's a, you know, you do, I had never had to think about those things. And just uh, as a thing that might happen, uh, the experience of mentally, I'm glad I have not had the experience of actually throwing up on the show, but the
Mm-hmm.
experience, I have had the experience of, you know, literally blowing up a computer with a cannon. So I've expanded the range here of things that my human experience on the show, but I'm not looking forward to the experience of vomiting on the show, but the
Mm-hmm.
experience of contemplating having to throw up on the show and wondering how I would handle it and trying to
Right.
figure out. Vomiting is one of those things that you don't always know you're going to do. And
Mm-hmm.
so, like right now, I would say, very low percent chance of vomiting.
Right.
But when that gets up around 50-50, you start thinking, okay, well, I'm okay now, but where am I going to be
Right.
60 seconds from now?
Right.
Um,
I usually
yeah,
get the 60-second warning. You're just like cruising along. Yeah, I feel crummy, and then you're like, uh-oh.
yeah, exactly. So I
I
would,
I have
I
60
would
seconds to
be
find a bowl.
I would be grateful sometimes for a 60-second warning. And, I just, and doing a whole show where you're constantly like, am I at the 60-second mark
Mm-hmm.
here? Am I like, so that was an interesting experience. And I'm glad we've had a chance to debrief on it because
Right.
one of the things I didn't do in that show is talk about it because one if you talk about vomiting when you're nauseous it's just going to
Yeah,
cause
you're
trigger
asking
it
for it.
and also yeah, I mean that's just and so I'm glad we concluded this show with vomit because we wouldn't want dignity to creep up
Well, I did start that one show with fart jokes, and now we're leaving
with
with vomit.
vomit.
By the
Yeah.
way, I think you'll find this just as a closing note. The farting on an elevator advice I did not follow once on one elevator, and it was in the Skadden building, and
Interesting.
I paid the price for it.
Well,
I farted in a Skadden elevator once.
I think that is worthy. All right. I do want to point out
I'm
that
going
this
to let
just
you go, let you kind of close up, but
all
great
right.
talking to you.
Great talking to you, Joel.
All right, we'll see you.
So I want to point out that this does not, contrary to what the Greek chorus is saying, this does not count as Nastia standing me up today because I texted Nastia this morning asking her if she wanted to join, and she responded that she was looking at a house or an apartment in Kiev by FaceTime at the top of the hour and would try to join 15 or 20 minutes in. So this is not actually standing up. This was me assuming. I don't believe she ever assured me she would be here or anything. She just said she was planning on it if she could. So Nastia gets a pass. Besides, when you have an infant slash toddler, no appointments are serious. They're all aspirational. We do not. So we hold. That's right, Andrew. She gave me assurances of attending Dog Shirt TV, not guarantees. And if you do not understand that reference, you need to watch or listen to the Escalation podcast, which just wrapped up yesterday with the final episode, the finale. And if I do say so myself, it rocked. Folks, have a great day. We're going to be back tomorrow. Maybe I'll be here by myself. Maybe I'll be here with the estimable Ev Gaman. Maybe I will be here with somebody else entirely. But I will be here with you.